Welcome to this on-demand session. The theme is problem solving through technology. In this session, we'll be exploring use of Sitecohost plugin architecture to transition on-premises Active Directory workloads onto Azure. I'll start by first introducing myself. My name is Julius Angweniy. I'm a senior Sitecore architect at Avanade. At Avanade, we offer a comprehensive customer experience expertise with our Accenture and Microsoft heritage, and I'm proud to be part of this team. We are a Sitecore Global Platinum Partner. As an aspiring Sitecore MVP myself, I've got a privilege of working with 12 other Sitecore MVPs here at Avanade. Our true global presence means we have 300 plus Sitecore customers in 20 plus countries. Our continued excellence has seen us winning 25 plus Sitecore awards in the last 5 years. I live in Bournemouth in the United Kingdom. Before we look at the session agenda, please let me share this particular question, which was asked on a Sitecore Q&A community website. When you look around this community website, you'll notice it's a common question being asked by many people. In fact, it resonates well with this session too. It goes like this. I am upgrading an 8.2 instance with AD module to 9.3, but I can't find much information about connecting IS4 to AD. Has anyone connected federated authentication with an on-prem AD? Well, I recognize many people or businesses out there perhaps have a similar question or concern with the AD module. And you probably got a huge investment already with your on-premises AD. I hope this session helps address Chris's question and also for you. So the agenda is, first, I'll be doing a brief recap on what is Sitecore AD module with an older version of Sitecore XP.2 instance. This will set the context for the Sitecore AD module issue we'll be exploring in this session. Second, we will briefly look at what is Sitecohost and what is Sitecore Identity. Third, we will explore what are some of your upgrade options to address the Sitecore AD module issue as you transition your workloads into Azure. This, of course, will include a discussion around the use of Sitecohost architecture. I will finish with the demo to show you how easy and quick it is to create a custom Sitecore Identity Host plugins, leveraging the Sitecohost. In simple terms, Sitecore Active Directory module integrates the AD domain with your CMS solution. This allows you to leverage existing investments on your AD in your Sitecore instance. I'll do a quick whistle-stop tour on Sitecore AD module use cases next. All right, we will start with XP 8.2 on-premises use case. First, you download, install, and configure the Sitecore Active Directory package on your Sitecore instance. Then you typically configure the ASP.NET security providers. The membership provider is for mapping your AD users into Sitecore instance users. The roles provider is for mapping your AD groups into your Sitecore instance roles. For example, you like to map AD marketing department into a Sitecore marketing automation role. Optionally, the profile provider is for any additional AD attributes that you would like to associate with your Sitecore instance user's profile. Then you choose to enable the directory notifications or the live mode, which means you can make changes automatically between AD instance and Sitecore instance. Next, let us look at XP 8.2 on Azure use case. Here, we are talking about leveraging Azure Web Apps for your Sitecore instance. This setup works with Azure Active Directory domain services. Can I reiterate here that this doesn't work with Azure AD on its own? This setup supports read-only mode, meaning you can only sync users one way from the AD into your Sitecore instance. You can't sync changes in Sitecore back to the AD. Note, you can only integrate the web app which is within the same VNet as the Azure AD domain. This is because you cannot really domain join an Azure web app. And lastly, let's look at our final use case, XP 9.3 and later. Here, the Sitecore AD module is deprecated and is no longer supported. There's no official Sitecore package to replace this one. So the question remains, what next for both on-premises and Azure use cases? All right, as I'll be explaining in the coming slides, Sitecore Identity is our way forward. Next up then is the Sitecore Host and the Sitecore Identity recap. Before we look into this, allow me to define what I'm calling classic authentication scheme. Sitecore XP 8.2 and older versions make use of classic authentication scheme with the ASP.NET membership provider. This means when you log in into your Sitecore instance, the user credentials are being validated against those stored in your Sitecore database. When you successfully log in, Sitecore issues a domain-specific cookie to the user's browser to access the Sitecore application. We will be comparing this classic authentication scheme with a federated authentication scheme in the next couple of slides. I'll briefly start with Sitecore Identity. What is Sitecore Identity? It is a new Sitecore role for managing identity and authentication available in the latest versions of Sitecore. This diagram illustrates the Sitecore Identity data flows. As you can see, it's showing that the CM role now actually relies on the Sitecore Identity Server to manage identity and authentication in Sitecore using the federated authentication scheme. More about this in a minute, but first, let's also try and introduce what is Sitecore Host. Introduced in version 9.1, Sitecore Host is the new common platform for all Sitecore services. It is a base for a Sitecore service which contains the base code for addressing a number of common concerns such as unified service registrations, unified configurations, unified file systems, among others. What this means is your developers can take advantage of this base code to easily extend and create plugins to meet your business needs. It's based on .NET Core Hosting Bundle version 2. Hence, it is cross-platform, meaning you could deploy or scale out your Sitecohost services into other operating systems of your choice, such as Linux or Mac OS. This could also save you costs. Now then, we are back to explore Sitecore Identity into more details. Needless to say, Sitecore Identity is a Sitecore host application in itself. I particularly like this diagram in front of you as it helps illustrate Sitecore Identity Server in action. As you can see here, Sitecore Identity Server is the new mechanism to log into Sitecore for both the Sitecore local users, such as the local Sitecore admin, and external users, such as users belonging to an Azure Active Directory or a Facebook. How does this work then? Okay, Sitecore Identity Server is based on Identity Server 4, which is an OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0 framework for ASP.NET Core applications. You can think of Identity Server 4 as authentication as a service. Let me try to digest this further for you. Unlike the classic authentication scheme I described earlier, this makes use of a federated authentication scheme. Federated authentication scheme means you can configure one or more trusted identity providers. The keyword here is trusted. The provider could be an Azure AD, for example, and they will be responsible for managing your user authentication into your Sitecore instance. Therefore, when the user accesses a Sitecore instance, they will be redirected to a login page of this provider. For our current example, this will be the Azure AD login page. On successful login, the user will be redirected back to your Sitecore instance. First, this will send a token issued by the provider, Azure AD in this example. Second, Sitecore will recognize the token and then issue with a domain-specific cookie to allow access to your Sitecore instance. In technical terms, the external user can be mapped into Sitecore persistent user or virtual user using the claims from the identity provider. In a demo later in this session, I'll be showing an example of how to do the mappings. The identity provider effectively is the single source of truth for the user management. In summary, Sitecore Identity Server acts as a federation gateway to configure multiple identity providers for your Sitecore instance. It is built on top of Sitecore Host. Other examples of Sitecore Host applications being the publishing service, Universal Tracker, and Horizon. Now, back to the diagram. As you can see on the top left corner, I have wrapped the on-premises Active Directory with a web application proxy. This, in effect, is an ADFS wrapper around the on-premises AD to get the federated authentication on top of it. ADFS stands for Active Directory Federated Services. In fact, I'm now able to use the on-premises Active Directory with Sitecore Identity Server. Since the Sitecore AD module is now deprecated, we have the red cross on it because we no longer need it, or it can no longer work with the latest Sitecore. Each of these providers, you can see here, are actually implemented as Sitecohost plugins, which, as I alluded earlier, are built on .NET Core. By the way, Sitecore ships with an Azure AD plugin out of the box and is ready for you to use. Are you currently faced with a deprecated AD module? Let us look at possible upgrade options to the latest Sitecore version 9.3 or version 10 for your Sitecore identity management. All right, we will start with the first option, to not use on-premises AD. If you choose to stop using on-premises AD with your Sitecore instance, then you will need to upgrade from 8.2 to 9.3 or version 10 using the Sitecore provided security database scripts. Then you'll need to use the default Sitecore identity provider for your Sitecore local users. This option means you'll keep all your existing CMS users after the upgrade. There will be no need of doing on-premises AD sync anymore. Your upgraded Sitecore identity database is now your single source of truth for the identity management. Now, let's look at the next option we have. Keep on-premises AD. If you choose to keep your on-premises AD with your Sitecore instance, then you will need to make it work with the latest Sitecore 9.3 or version 10. To achieve this, you will need to do a vanilla 9.3 or version 10 installation. No Sitecore security database upgrade is necessary in this scenario. Use a custom ADFS Sitecore Identity Host plugin. I'll be showing you a demo later in this session about this plugin. Now, you have your on-premises AD working with the Sitecore identity. So your on-premises AD users can access Sitecore instance. You do not need to do any more on-premises AD sync since we are using Sitecore identity. Your on-premises AD is now your single source of truth for identity management. Let's look at our last option, switch into Azure AD. Depending on your cloud transformation strategy, this is probably what you should be considering at some point. We have a couple of options here, such as using Azure AD Connect or Azure AD Connect Health to help with the transformation. I still recommend working with your digital transformation partner to explore further options. So, if you choose to switch into Azure AD Then you will need to do a vanilla 9.3 or version 10 installation as we did in our previous option. No Sitecore security database upgrade is necessary. Then use the Azure AD Sitecore Identity plugin that ships out of the box with Sitecore. Now your AD users can access your Sitecore instance. No Azure AD sync is necessary since you are using Sitecore Identity. Azure AD is now your single source of truth for identity management. All of these three upgrade options, all we are saying here is Sitecore Identity is our answer and our way forward. And now for our last agenda item, let's move on to the demo. I'll do a whistle-stop tour of creating a Sitecohost plugin for Sitecore Identity. Later on, I'll deploy the plugin and show you in action. Here I have a .NET Standard version 2 Visual Studio solution, and the coding language is C#. Within this configure sitecore.cs code file, I'm injecting into the OWIN pipeline to handle WS Federation authentication scheme. OWIN middleware is an open web interface for .NET. This particular WS Federation implements the on-premises Active Directory Federation Services authentication. As you can see here, I have passed in the required parameters, such as the metadata address to the DFS instance. This plugin has an XML-based configuration file. The XML file works in the same way as your Sitecore config patch file. Basically, it allows you to customize some of the settings, such as the display name for the plugin, enable or disable the plugin. Another key thing you can see here is claims transformations. This allows us to define the rules on how we want to map the user attributes from our AD into our Sitecore instance. It also defines how you want to map your AD groups into Sitecore roles, for example. Later on, I'm going to package this using my DevOps pipeline and deploy this to my local Sitecore instance. I've skipped the step for brevity, but as you can see here, the folder structure has a Sitecore runtime, and it has also a plugin folder where the DLL file, which we produced earlier, is going to be deployed, and also the config file will host the XML configuration file. Later on, I'll be refreshing my Sitecore Identity instance, which will show you an additional identity provider appearing on the login page. This is the one which we have developed now, and following the link will redirect me to the ADFS login page, on which I will specify the user credentials, and hopefully my user will be redirected back to Sitecore, allowed to access whatever has been defined within the claims transformation I showed you earlier. And that's it. That's the simple way of creating a custom ADFS plugin. I hope you enjoyed this. The code samples are going to be available for you in my GitHub repo. Thank you for watching. And for the next steps, I share with you my contact details on this slide. Please follow me on Twitter, visit my blog for related technical topics, download the speaker sources where you'll find links to my GitHub repository. Please join us on sitecore.stackexchange.com, where we are answering similar questions like the one we have discussed in this session. Please join us on sitecorechat.slack.com as well. I would like to thank you very much for viewing this on-demand session. I'd appreciate if you could complete a quick 1-minute session survey and provide your feedback. Please click the session survey button located in the left-hand panel of this session page. If you have any further questions or would like to contact me, please use the contact details I shared in my previous slide. Thank you.